and welcome to this virtual event brought to you by the Conference Board. The title today is The Ultimate Disruption, Connecting with Consumers During Coronavirus, and it's a virtual event that brings us together. My name is JP Kuwein. I'm the principal at brand strategy company Überbrands. I teach brand and business strategy at NYU Stern and Columbia Business School. And here's the connection. I am the leader of the Marketing Institute here at the Conference Board. And today we're gathered virtually as an exception. And it is exactly this exceptional situation we're going to discuss today and talk about in the context of leading brands and businesses and leading them through this corona crisis. As people are all advised to stay home, just like we are, companies must obviously reevaluate their marketing strategies. They must be sure that they're socially and ethically responsible, keeping people safe and apart, but at the same time, they need to take care of their business. And that can be a fine line between being humble and helpful or being pushy and coming across as profiteering. And this is kind of one of the cross sections, one of the hotspot points we're going to talk about. And here to discuss this with me today, virtually, are experts that can look at this from various angles. I'm very excited to have with us Gerald Hasty. Hello, Gerald. He is Global Director of Support and Community at Masterclass. Very relevant and very much the word of mouth spreading around this brand in the current time. So we'll definitely talk about that. I have Don Spalding, who is the head of, who is the head of Design and Innovation at Verizon Wireless. We have Max Kalhoff, who is the Vice President of Marketing at Real Eyes, and that is a, call it remote consumer understanding and AI-supported consumer understanding technology company. Also very relevant in these times, just like Verizon, keeping us probably connected as we speak. And then finally, Martin Carafa, who is associate partner at Hofstede Insights and specializes in kind of the cultural as well as the organizational and the consumer psychology aspects as we are dealing with the crisis and trying to build brands and businesses at the same time. So I think this will make for a very interesting conversation, since hopefully we're going to be able to cover, you know, the whole band of marketing, organization culture, consumer research, and customer interface kind of aspects of this crisis. And to get us started, maybe on a positive aspect, maybe if I could ask each one of you in a couple of seconds to give us a brief background of who you are, what role you play at your company, and then one thing that you learned, big or small, of how to be a better marketer or just person pushed through this corona crisis. Gerald, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. So again, my name is Gerald Hasty with Masterclass. We're an online education tool. We have classes by major masters in the different industries. So with that, what we are doing is, again, I run the support and community side. And so what we are doing in that regard is just listening to our customers and understanding kind of what they're looking for and what they're needing. And we're trying to be cognizant of not, you know, to your point, kind of profiteering from this piece. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's kind of what we've been kind of focusing on, just making sure that we are listening to what our customers are needing in this time of crisis and how we can help in that space. Does that answer your question?
Excellent. Something that you learned you didn't know 4 weeks ago that now becomes very apparent to you, forced by the crisis?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. What didn't we know? Well, I don't know. Let me say, wouldn't say what we didn't know, but what we're kind of learning and finding out now is now because of people are home. You know, our product is kind of online streaming video of content, and we saw a lot of kind of content being used over the holidays, over the weekends, like on a Saturday or Sunday. Now, obviously, some people at home, we're seeing more of a different shift in kind of usage of our product focus. I think that's one thing that we've learned. I think the other thing that we've learned is that there's an appetite for, so our products on an annual basis, there's actually an appetite for like providing a 3-month version of our product or a 6-month version of our product. So those are probably things we've learned now that we did not think through before.
Excellent, excellent. I think it's one of the themes we're going to find is that actually the crisis forces you to rethink your business model. And it might have good outcomes in terms of developing new offerings, new ways of going to market, etc. Don, I'm going to pass it over to you. Verizon, everyone knows it, but can you tell us what your role is and something you learned?
Yeah, so Don Spalding, I'm with our enterprise business. So I'm typically out with clients, helping them to drive better experiences, use a lot of the different types of innovation, some of the things that we do with both our partners and internally here at Verizon to help drive those better experiences. I'm finding that over the last few weeks, the focus has been much more rudimentary. It really is about keeping people connected. And it's really, really impressive. I think one of the things I'm finding is just how much people rely on that connectivity. I think we all kind of took it for granted and just assumed it was there. And now as we're seeing some of the different urgent points in which we're responding to this crisis, we're just really, again, seeing just how necessary that is. And I don't know if I would have had that same perspective a few weeks ago, but that's certainly something that's top of mind today.
Right. A lot more awareness of kind of the utility of basics that we took for granted, whether it's hospitals, whether it's supermarkets, or whether it's a good connection via Verizon. Certainly a dynamic that can be very interesting from a brand and business building perspective. New appreciation for things, including, let's say, Heinz baked beans. Who would have thought that 3 weeks ago? Max, you are in a different field here. You're more in a startup mode, but you're right there with the kind of technological cutting edge. Could it have changed your world even more? Can you become even more agile? Did you learn something new? And what the heck are you doing?
Sure, 100%. So we work with about 170 different brands and media companies. And I can tell you that in 1 week, we will have pivoted our go-to-market strategy. But what I've learned is that marketers are much more emotional versus rational themselves than they care to admit. You might think that an automatic instinct or reaction for a marketer during a time of great change is to get closer to your consumers, to understand them. The fact is, some marketers do that. Some marketers are retreating back and saying, I must stop everything. I only care about the safety of myself and my family right now. So that was a big learning, and I think we've seen sort of a bifurcation of marketers who are bold and demonstrating leadership, and some other marketers who are more, I would call them passive, in protecting them, CYA, and just want to wait and see things out. But the big macro learning that is different than 6 weeks ago is that we now have to ask ourselves if we're on the if we're at the beginning of a new normal in terms of our norms and the way we look at things. Throughout history, if you look at 9/11, for example, you had marketers digest the situation and then believe they go right back to normal, a couple months later, a few weeks later. And this is probably an unprecedented event in that we're really having to ask ourselves, as a measurement company, are we hitting a blip, or are we entering an entirely new normal where marketers need to reevaluate what are their thresholds for things as simple as consumer sentiment.
Right. Interesting, Martin. That's a great segue. We had quite a few conversations, you and I, including on a conference podcast about culture, consumer behavior, and the big question, is the culture influencing the way we react to COVID? And the answer clearly is yes, and it does in different ways. But also this COVID event, this crisis might affect and impact culture and consumer behaviors for longer than just the duration of the crisis, right? Can you tell us a little bit, what are you doing? What's Hofstede? And what are your one key insight quickly that you've taken away already in these past 3 weeks?
Okay, well, I'm very happy to introduce myself quickly. I'm Martin Carafa, and I am an independent consultant working with Hofstede Insights. And we look at the emotions of consumers and indeed people around the world through a slightly different lens from Max, but a very complementary one too. And we look at it from the point of view of culture. What's our instincts? What do we think is good and bad? What do we feel comfortable with? Those kinds of questions are what I answer from the point of view of consumers. I spent many years as a global planning director for advertising agencies working on global brands. And it became very obvious to me that the things like market dynamics and macroeconomics, which you would think would drive global brands, really hit a wall when you come to the different cultures around the world. And I saw more and more evidence that was important. And that led me to the current role that I have today. I've worked on brands that you would think would be universal, but are actually quite different. Mercedes-Benz was a client, and where you sell SUVs and sedans is entirely cultural. Listerine was part of my global remit once.
And Purell, I think.
Purell, yes, and the business of cleanliness is very important around the world. And your question was, what have I learned professionally, and perhaps what have I learned personally? I'm going to share a personal learning. My husband, Masa, who's Japanese, and we now live in Munich, and we have family all around the world. And this crisis has really brought home to me how we have taken the ability to see them, to visit them, to talk to them for granted. And we've been doing a lot more to reach out to our family, our loved ones who are spread around the world, because it's not going to be so easy for the next at least few months. And I don't know what the future holds in general for that kind of easy, global, getting on a jet, going around the world. That's both in business and on a personal level. And that's what I've learned, to appreciate what we had before.
Excellent, wonderful. Actually, it ties in with what I was going to share, which is, as I said at the beginning, I teach at NYU and Columbia, and literally moved my class and my teaching from in-class to online, Zoom specifically as a platform, the same platform you're using today, within 48 hours. So I kind of predicted to the students, we will see each other online, and my bet worked out, unfortunately, and 48 hours we were on Zoom. And it's just amazing how quickly this transformation to online teaching was forced by the crisis. And it shows also, I like to talk about it in terms of accelerating the Darwinian kind of undercurrents that were there anyway, how it has forced kind of transformations. I kind of see, three segments to kind of introduce us here to the core subject. I see businesses that basically are down right now or on pause, like Max was talking about, and they are the restaurants, the hairdressers, maybe the movie theaters, even though there it gets dicey. And you can probably expect that people will come back to get their hair cut and to eat out. But then there are the business where already they had a hard time, let's say department stores, Macy's, and now obviously they're down to zero, and there's a real question of whether they're going to survive, or if they use this crisis to finally force themselves, not wait it out longer and transform themselves. And then on the other end, there seem to be these businesses like the Zoom platform that we're all on all of a sudden right now, which, by the way, is valued as a business now more than all the combined airlines of the United States combined, if you've seen that 1,800 PE ratio, and that are booming and are truly transforming industry. So I want to ask you, and maybe start with Don and Gerald. Verizon was taken for granted. If anything, I would say probably only people noticed you when something didn't work out. Don, is what I often hear from people in the utility industry. Now you've become essential. How are you coping with that? But also, are there emerging opportunities that you see coming from this renewed interest, this renewed interaction with your customer that maybe you can leverage to the good for the longer term?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we obviously are in the business of connecting people, and that's been the business we've been in for a long time. What we've seen, though, is just how essential that is in today's day of crisis. And just to throw some information to kind of illustrate that out there. So week over week, we've seen like a 70% increase in like online gaming. We see an increase of about 80 million phone calls a day. We see an increase of about 8 billion SMS messages a day. So what that says to us is that people have a need to communicate at the very most fundamental level, which is a mission that we've always sustained. But what we found is that we have to really diversify and really fortify what it is that we have regarding infrastructure, what it is in regards to how we basically allow people to communicate. Use Zoom as an example. So over the past couple of weeks, one, we're making sure we find stability with our network, because that really is the core to all the things that we're all doing. But secondarily, we're finding that, okay, now we need to really find ways to diversify how folks are communicating. So in the past, for example, when we would work with state agencies, we would always talk about automation, virtual services. We'd always talk about what are those nice to have kind of things from their perspective. Today, what we see is with huge spikes in unemployment claims, huge spikes in folks who need to connect with the healthcare industry, huge spikes around what we need in terms of first line responders. All those nice to have things that allowed people to self-service, allowed people to find ways to get their needs met in different ways, now have to be layered on top of that connectivity and that network. There's just not enough people in many instances to be able to respond to all the phone calls or respond to all the needs. And so we as a company have always kind of recognized that there were other things that we needed to do beyond connecting people. But in the past few weeks, that has just been emphasized to a degree that I never would have anticipated. And we see many industries that were not previously going in directions to be able to help with that in that manner, really do a lot to try to service their constituencies and their customers.
Right. Excellent. Gerald, people are discussing Zoom, they're discussing Peloton, they're discussing Netflix. They're saying, wow, these companies benefit right now. They see their business explode, and they will probably come out stronger. A lot of the Amazon business and delivery people think that they will be hooked by the time they come out of this and no longer want to shop physically for a lot of things. You are in one of those businesses, Masterclass. People have a lot of time on their hands right now. Masterclass is offering masterclasses, celebrities, expert, famous people talking about very diverse things, kind of entertainment and education at the same time. I also saw that you advertise quite a bit more, or at least it seems to me, maybe because I'm in front of the screen more. How do you balance leveraging that momentum, that opportunity, that driving of trial, which is very important for a brand new startup like you, and at the same time trying to avoid to look greedy or even profiteering?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, JP. So I think you're right. We have seen a huge kind of like spike in our volume and interest in our product, which is great. But you're right. We internally talk about like, wow, we feel kind of bad, right? But having said that, what we have done, I think, which is a good thing, is our CEO, co-founder of the company, sent an email out to all of our existing subscribers back in March and said, hey, we know you're going through tough times. Here's what we want to do. We want to give you a gift of masterclass to give to your friends so you guys can learn, friend or family members, so you guys can learn. So we did that. So all of our existing subscribers got an email from him saying, hey, give away. So we gave away free annual subscription. So that's the first thing kind of we did. I think the second thing that we've done too is then we actually announced a promotion where we call it buy one, share one. So now you can buy a subscription. So somebody who's new can buy a subscription and then get a second subscription as well. So not only did the people who are already are members got a free gift, now people who now are interested in our product are now going to be able to not only buy our product, but then be able to gift one to somebody else. So I think that helps us from seeming to be kind of profiteering from it, but at the same time seeing some value in that. And then obviously what we hope is that people who get a free gift will renew after the year. But those are some of the things that we have done to so you're right, we have done some more advertising than Amazon, not because you're home, JP, it's because we are doing that. But at the same token, I think we leverage that with the fact that we're giving one away every time we buy one. I think that makes it a little bit more palatable, if you will. And that creates that balance that you're talking about.
And we've done a little bit of research even before COVID, and as long as doing business and doing good fits together and is not balanced one way or the other, consumers actually do not mind. They understand businesses need to survive. They understand, I guess, maybe even more today than before, that employment is a precious thing. So if you pay for something and it means other people are employed, people are okay with that as long as it doesn't come across as price gouging or as profiteering. Marty, we've talked about Verizon, and it seems logic, everyone needs to be connected so this business, can work right now. Masterclass actually can benefit from the stay-at-home trend and people getting bored or wanting to develop themselves while they're twiddling or not twiddling their thumbs. What about businesses that are probably off the radar screen, or you would at least assume it? Let's say motor oils, let's say cat litter. What should they do? Just hunker down, save as much money as they can, or are there ways to engage, or would it be frivolous to engage? Do you have some insights there?
Well, one of the things you don't do, and this is the advice I give my clients, is you don't try to create artificial relevance for your brand by tagging on to an irrelevant, albeit well-meaning message. One of the things, and put my foot in it right at the moment. One of the things you don't do is redesign your logo so the elements are separated in order to promote social distancing, for example, because that looks like you're using the crisis to draw attention to your brand.
You're talking about Audi, Coca-Cola, McDonald's,
and well, particularly McDonald's, who suffered a very, very stringent backlash on that one. It looks like you're using current events to draw attention to your brand, and that smacks of profiteering. Your consumers are doing it tough. They're making sacrifices. They expect you to be making sacrifices too, not making profit that you haven't earned out of it, or trying to make your brand relevant to it. Let's take your motor oil brand. It may seem like there's no relevance. And of course, the motor oil brand will be doing it tough because people are driving less. But on the other hand, a motor oil company, motor oil is very important for the fleet of delivery vans and ambulances and police cars that we're depending on ever the more, right? So what are you doing to help that, even though you are suffering? What are you doing to help the small garages and repair shops that deal with you? What are you doing? Have you lobbied car manufacturers to allow people to change their own oil without voiding the warranty in their, private, socially distanced driveway? Even cat litter, talking about how to dispose of cat litter safely when you're in lockdown. How do you do some kind of communication, create some kind of content that perhaps talks about the value of companion animals when people are in lockdown.
Right.
And that can create emotional content. It's not just something that you talk about in an unengaging way or a way that's not memorable. Right. The emotional, the fact that consumers respond better to emotional content like that, if you've earned the right to talk about it by actually helping out, is very important.
Right. To follow up on that, you talk a lot about what they do. It seems to me that the critique or the absence of it, and on the contrary, support for some of the almost public service announcements that many big companies have put on air, is whether there's any evidence on social media or media in general that they actually live up to that high emission. And it seems to me that the backfiring of the McDonald's action was in particular when people immediately started to tweet, yeah, it's great social distancing, but you're not paying your workers sick leave, so they are forced to come together and get infected, etc. Are actions even more relevant and important now versus the words than before?
Well, I think there's a trend in the early part of the 21st century. I mean, that's already been happening. Consumers have always been saying, why are you giving me the beautiful images and pretty pictures, which they like, it's fantastic, you know, respond very well to it. But if it's not relevant, then it doesn't have that kind of, I think what we'd say Byron Sharp would call those, that link to a memory structure. You know, that relevance is very important. Otherwise, they are just pretty pictures that go back into the back of your head. Right. So I think that trend has been there for quite a while. Consumers don't respond to dreary messages, and we have a responsibility as communicators to engage. But I do think that you know, the combination of emotion and what I'm calling in this particular paragraph that we're in the middle of, what I'm calling relevance, or salience, or you know, ability to recall that because it's embedded in a memory structure that's related to the product. I think that's something that's been demanded for a while.
All right. Interesting, Max. By the way, wonderful plug here. I'm going to do shamelessly. We have interviewed Byron Sharp. Thanks for mentioning him. You will find that on a podcast of the Conference Board. I almost missed that opportunity. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah,
Max,
big fan.
There are brands right now that, for me at least, are getting a second chance. Okay, I just got off the phone with a actually for another webcast we're going to do at the Conference Board, and we both said companies like Heinz, for example, get an incredible opportunity with everyone stocking up on the basics like the baked beans or orange juice. Both of these categories were down before the crisis and now are going through the roof to the extent that they're out of stocks and the raw material prices explode. I would say, though, that in order to actually make that a sustained growth opportunity, they need to understand what's going on with the consumer. If this is just short-term panic, if this is a rethinking. But the difficulty is that you cannot literally touch your consumer, you cannot go there, you cannot have these intimate conversations. You are providing tools on how to understand these consumers, maybe even without words. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, a danger with words, and particularly survey market research in a global pandemic when people are facing uncertainty and anxiety, is you can't always trust their words. And this is a time, in my experience, that marketers increasingly lean into naturally occurring metrics which inform important investments. And so now more than ever, I mean, not only are marketing and media investments getting scrutinized, but so are the actual intelligence tools getting scrutinized. And there's a desire to really focus in on the ones that surface truth about the market, about the consumer. So whether it's loyalty card data, whether it's e-commerce transactions, whether it's traffic patterns and subscriptions that Verizon can monitor, those are real indicators because they're observable and naturally occurring. And I'm going to selfishly just give a demo here so I can convey easier. But what I'm doing now is showing you what we do is we have a technology that uses the front-facing computers and an algorithm to observe and translate facial cues into emotions. And this is a long established division of psychology, and it's something that we've actually turned into a product to understand the naturally occurring emotion and attention of consumers. So we were able to bring this in front of people, their laptops, their mobile phones, their PCs. We do it only opt-in. We're very, very privacy safe, but we believe that this is a new normal. This is a normal where screens are always on, eyes are always on the screens, and cameras are always on. My camera's been on the majority of today. But the idea here is that we now have a way to tap into naturally occurring consumer sentiment. And what we've been finding is that we might be entering a new normal. We actually did a analysis last week looking at the response to advertising from February 25th. February 25th was significant because that's when the CDC declared that COVID-19 was a United States emergency. If you're in the US, it's a big deal. Compared to a year ago, we found that smiles in response to ads have decreased 32%. And it doesn't mean the ads are necessarily bad. And this may be a blip, it may be a new normal. But what it does is give us a naturally occurring indicator about what consumers are feeling at a mass scale that you would never be able to really pull out of them in any other way. And like COVID-19, different advertising messaging sectors are getting impacted in different ways. Maybe not surprisingly, the biggest driver of the reduction in smiles is the travel and hospitality industry. Their ads do not prompt the same smiles that they once did. Ads that show groups of people high-fiving or putting their finger into a bucket of fried chicken do not create the same smiles anymore. And likewise, some luxury goods are suffering. Now is a period where people are focused on their safety, their comfort, and as we adopt and embrace what our new normal becomes, then we'll start to get back to business. Then brands, we suspect, will start to sell again. And you talked about the automobile example, Martin. And last week we did an analysis on the auto manufacturers, which was an interesting category because they were the first major industry to pivot in its entirety because they have to get people in the showroom every weekend. And what we found is that Ford, the Ford Motor brand, stuck out like a sore thumb against all the others. And the reason was they had relatively just far more attention and engagement for their message. And what was the difference? They didn't product sell. They didn't sell speeds and feeds. They didn't sell Wi-Fi or OnStar. They had very subtle, iconic imagery, no voiceover, and themes of endurance and stability, surviving through multiple world wars, lasting over 100 years. And so that tells us something about the receptivity of people right now in this stage of COVID-19.
Yeah, interesting. I think there's an interesting mixed feelings actually that I get through this demonstration and what you say. On the one hand, it's super. I guess a lot of people say, wow, I want to have that technology. I want to know this about my consumers. Just like with all the other platforms that we hear about, whether it's Slack or Zoom, whether it's the Amazons, etc. On the other hand, there was already this underlying concern about technology taking over, AI getting smarter than us, our privacy being compromised, etc. Granted, it changes from country to country and city versus rural, but overall there is this trend. I guess Gerald and then Max, as you explode in your businesses, your platform-based businesses that also include a lot of personal information. Is this currently, or is it always on your mind? What are you doing to try and avoid the trap and kind of sustain the positive momentum and try not to fall into the negatives? We just heard a big scandal. It was revealed that Zoom works with Facebook and privacy data was exchanged again. It seems like the fast growing companies almost can't avoid falling into these traps. Are you very aware of that? How do you deal with that?
Sure. Well, respect for the consumer comes first. So I can't speak for other companies, but I can speak for our team. And you know, being a protector and promoter of the own brand that I work for as a B2B company, and also my fiduciary duty to look after our customers, is the consumer comes first. That's paramount. I mean, that's in our DNA and our culture. But I think there's another angle to that. All of a sudden, amidst COVID-19, the hunger and the responsiveness to technology somehow it's become much more embraced than perhaps ever before. So we might be entering a new norm where we think about technology maybe not so much a bad thing all the time. Maybe it's actually the glue to social connectedness, you know, right now. So maybe the opposite might have been said before, that phones are turning us all under ourselves and technology is bad. But now it seems like everybody loves it because it's bringing us all together in a situation.
Right. Don and Gerald, you are in the tech sector. You're in the bullseye of this. Anything you do, any change of tone, any change of procedures, or on the contrary, right now, that's not something you can deal with on top of everything else, ramping up coverage, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Good question. I guess I'll take that first and let kind of Don follow up. So on our side for Masterclass, yeah, I think we have changed some procedures and what have you, and changed kind of how we're doing certain things. So I'll give you a perfect example. You know, obviously we have a refund policy that has a set in stone, right? What we're seeing now is there's a lot of, you know, customers saying, hey, you know what? I just got laid off. I'd love to see if we can, you know, if I can get a refund for my Masterclass, because right now they just can't afford it, right? So that's something that we normally would say no to, but we're showing some compassion, understanding that people are going through tough times right now. So now we're relaxed in our refund policy that we wouldn't have been in the past. So that's something that we've done. You know, I also run the community side. And so what we've done is actually created a community forum just to talk about working from home, live from home, and then talk. So we got to chat folks who are like, people working from home and actually doing homeschooling. What is that like? What challenges you're facing? So we are actually doing some things with our existing customer base to have them have an opportunity to talk with each other and with us about the challenges they're facing in this new environment. So those are just kind of two examples of things that we're doing around tone and relaxing of procedures.
Gotcha. Don?
Yeah, I think we're doing some similar things. So we know how important it is for people to stay connected. So on our consumer side, we're waiving late fees. We're not doing any turnoffs. We're on the business side, creating a lot more leniency around making sure that our businesses are connected. On more of a proactive kind of effort, we're going out and making sure that the people who it's essential to be connected are getting connected. So for example, the Navy hospital ship Comfort, as it came into New York Harbor, really didn't have any connectivity. So we made sure that they were connected. Los Angeles Unified School District, about 20% of their student population, when they went to a stay-at-home model, did not have network connectivity. So we went out to try to ensure that they were connected. Over the weekend, we had a military, a healthcare unit that needed to come into New York to support some of the efforts there. We extended and made sure they had devices and things to connect them. We're working a lot with state agencies today to not only make sure they're connected, but even beyond getting connected, there's a shortage of people who can answer phone calls. So we've worked with relationships across all of our client bases. So for example, if you look at the hotel industry, those agents that used to take hotel reservations really are not required. A lot of them have been laid off and furloughed. So we're trying to roll industries like that into the service aspect of what's needed today to support different clients who are seeing an acceleration in demand. We're doing a lot of things that we would not have typically done. We're really trying to extend ourselves as much as we can.
Right. We're getting some very good questions here coming from the audience. And so I wanted to address some of those. A lot of them around how do you make yourself known and promote yourself without appearing to profiteer. I think Gerald just provided a good example in terms of showing that you're caring for those who can't pay all right now, etc. Show that you have your offering as well. I think, Martin, when we talked, you were talking also about a media opportunity that particularly for smaller businesses as being talked here, or B2B businesses, actually media, at least for a while, was quite cheap, relatively speaking, right? Can you talk a little bit about how that might be an opportunity for these businesses right now?
Well, again, it depends on the size of the business. For ultra small businesses, you know, like if you're an independent consultant, say, like myself, it's to make sure that you stay in touch with your customers directly because you can identify them. And that's something that's good hygiene in any case, no matter what. But let's talk about to the small to medium-sized businesses, not a big global brand or a national brand who can afford lots and lots of television. But what are the channels that are available to you now to, number one, talk about what you're doing so that you actually do contact consumers? And number two, that give you the ability to give the kind of emotional messages that create some sympathy with your customers and then with you. One of the things I'd point out is that if you're a medium-sized business and you've put a lot of money into performance marketing, not very useful now. If somebody, it's no use activating consumers that can't be activated, that can't go out and buy your product. How do you then go to those communication channels that you usually use for performance marketing, search, social, those kinds of things, and renegotiate what you're going to do? Loosen the strings on your targeting, because targeting is what makes it expensive. Demand reach, which we should have been doing anyway, that compensates for the high level of bots and partial views of any message that you have with your social media supplier. Twitter, for example, in the first quarter, because people are at home, they're on their phones, traffic up 28%, but they're not seeing the same return in terms of their income. Is this not an opportunity for, however you go to your performance marketing suppliers and say, pivot a bit and let us, you know, you're going to have to deliver a little bit more, some more eyeballs and ears and heart.
Right.
Really
I better be fast though, because it seems like there are quite a few brands that have now jumped on that. I mean, we're a couple of weeks in now. Obviously, everyone gets smarter. So you need to survey the market. Actually, Martin, you're a great provider of plugs because you've talked about the bots and how you need to be careful with social media. We had a conversation also at the conference board, and you have a podcast with Bob Hoffman, who is a great observer of, you know, making sure that you actually get the clicks and the likes that you need and that are useful when investing in social media. So definitely check that out.
Yeah. I want to add one extra thing if I could.
Sure.
And that is, whether you're a large or small business, now is the time really to invest in your influencers.
Right.
Because they're going to be the ones who, you know, they have a big audience that now that people are at home watching the social media or YouTube or whichever medium you use. And also they're going to be hungry for content. And if you can supply them with content to keep them going in a time when it's not naturally available to them, they're going to be very grateful.
Right. A good pitch. I teach brand strategy. We always talk about the Uber target. Those are the very influential, aspirational targets of a brand. Think of the Hells Angels for Harley Davidson or the athletes for Nike. Leverage these people, particularly if you have an organic relationship with them, to further the appeal, or at least stay in touch. There are a lot of questions here around what is the one literally, I'm quoting, technology thing, in quotes, that you think will survive this crisis, that will be used the most, that you personally will have pivoted to? Max, you're the techie here. Is there something, do you say this kind of technology approach or habit, or likely a combination thereof, we will all of a sudden see becoming a regular in our lives, which we wouldn't have expected a month ago?
Oh yeah, sure. I think it's obvious in front of us. There's, the pandemic is going to break a few broken industries. One of them being education.
Thank
it,
you.
It may not make sense to put 300 people in a lecture hall anymore. It's probably not going to happen in New York until next year at the earliest, if ever again.
Right. And I think if we can broaden it to education for everyone, not just thinking about universities. Yep. Gerald, I think it looks like a big opportunity for people like you and your company. Are you already having meetings around how to broaden the offering, how to segment more, or are you right now just in keep the lights on mode because there's so much demand, the service shouldn't burn out?
Yeah. Be honest with you, probably more the latter than the former, right? So we're almost a 5-year startup. So we're getting so much inbound traffic that it's hard for us to think through. Okay, so what's our long-term plan and strategy? So I think once we get over this kind of hump, then we'll sit down and think through. Okay, now how do we change our marketing strategy, our brand to kind of
right.
To deal with it.
Talking about education, it's an incredible moment because parents, students, instructors, sponsors of schools all realize this is possible virtually. And you could imagine a world where, the virtual classroom can be 10,000 students, in some cases without a problem. What that will do to smaller colleges that maybe don't have the star professors, don't have that bench strength, and whether they have a reason for being, or on the other hand, there are students that do require the classroom interaction that might become more special. And, how do you drive this differentiation of your brand? It really, I think, presents new challenges. Don, you are the grid on which this runs. You are the network. Are there opportunities for Verizon to kind of increase its value add beyond being the road everyone rolls on, beyond Gerald using your connectivity to bring his master classes through? Is there an opportunity for Verizon to increase its share of the value add?
Absolutely. And I think it really just starts with reliability. I mean, I think that the consistency that we provide, the services that people subscribe to us to provide, I think is really how we brand. And, I'm pretty impressed with the fact that we've been able to really support all this upturn in network activity. But beyond that, not everyone knows a lot about what Verizon does from an enterprise perspective. But we, for example, we in one form or other help to operate 94% of the Fortune 500 contact centers. So what we do in doing that is we employ a lot of technology, some of our own, some other technologies of partners, in which we now, when we see demand like we're seeing, can really, really start to get out there to support more people in more ways. So it's beyond just connecting them, but it's also really helping them to find more ways to communicate. And by communicate, I mean not just, when we get a call into a call center, but what we're doing around helping people to be able to service their own needs in the most seamless way. Basically, what Verizon, I think, can become is we can become the conduit to allow people to service their needs in whatever way they choose to service their needs. So if that means a changing model, for example, in education, in which students are now staying at home, if that's a changing model in terms of what we do in the workplace, we really can allow people to meet those needs in the way that they see fit and not have to drive it out of either just tradition or, what was always worked or what have you. I think we are really a canvas to be able to kind of paint that story in the way that, that users and clients and customers want to make it.
I like that you talk about the workplace, and you pointed to this before, Don. how has the crisis changed your relationships with your coworkers, with the people who work for you, and with your customers? Can you talk, is there some good that you see coming out of this?
Absolutely. I think it's ironic that every day at noon we have our CEO Hans Sesterberg on what we call Up to Speed, and we have, much like we have here, video and chat. And so, you know, I would hear from Hans, you know, every, you know, few weeks, you know, in some kind of communication. But there were other colleagues that I may never have heard of that worked at other aspects and other areas of the business that we're now all communicating with, not just now and then, but regularly every day. So it's not just a one-way form of communication in which, you know, the leadership sends messaging down, but it's a two-way form of communication in which we're dynamically real-time able to interact with people in a way that I've never seen take place. And I look forward to the noon call every day, not just because of the information, but the interaction.
Gerald, you are fully a virtual platform. I wonder, might there be opposite desires? We've seen a lot of digitally native brands like Warby Parker, et cetera, eventually going out, having their stores because they say they can't get around it. Are there considerations that you need some real classrooms as well to kind of make it real? Or do you feel that this entirely virtual world where the teacher never meets the student and the company never meets the customer other than through the screen is going to be perfectly acceptable and emotionally satisfying?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let me answer it kind of two ways. Look from the B2C perspective and from the B2B perspective. So from the B2C perspective, I think it's fine where we are now. I don't see a need for that per se. You know, maybe what we'll have seen a little bit of is people wanting, and maybe this is all over, people wanting to get together, like have offsites in different places around the world. It could be in Vietnam, could be in Cambodia, could be in Brazil, right? Where the people who are studying masterclass in that region will get together. And so we'll see maybe some of that. Now the interesting things on the B2B side. So on the B2B side, we're seeing a lot of companies who are buying our product for the employees, but then also people who have reached out to us like, hey, you know, we've canceled all of our conferences. So what we love to do is kind of use your product as our virtual classroom, if you will, right? And for our potential attendees. And then what they would also like to do is go a step further. They can not only do that, can we get one of your instructors? So for example, maybe they want to bring in Bob Iger, former CEO of Disney, who's on our platform, to come in and talk about business strategy. Maybe Aaron Sorkin talk about screenwriting. So those are the types of things that we're seeing now that we probably didn't see a lot of it before. Now people say, hey, we want to use your product, but maybe also bringing your one of your instructors live to interface with our attendees. So those are things that we are seeing now. We're getting requests from businesses, enterprises.
Excellent, excellent. I see another question here about brand as an employer, and that's an important subject. I want to make sure we still fit in these remaining minutes. Marty, we've talked this before. It seems that some employers gain new appreciation. I'm thinking of Walmart, for example, getting a lot of credit for sick pay, employing people, apparently being careful with you know, their warehouse operations, reaching out, pricing, and so on. And on the other hand, quite bad news for Amazon and Whole Foods, for example, for at least at the beginning, letting people go without sick pay, or people going on strike and then being fired and so on. What are the threats and opportunities here for brand as an employer that you see heightened and accelerated by this crisis?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the two examples. There's Walmart and there's Amazon, and they've both created long-form video content. I don't know if Max has tested either the Amazon or the Walmart ads, which would be a fascinating thing to get a read on.
Maybe we can make that a follow-up and post it.
But in both cases, what they did was they created video content that thanked their employees, right? So I would imagine that this is exactly what the viewer is talking about. That's a way to keep the employer brand in front of the in front of the public while they can't actually, in some cases, they can't employ more people. In these two cases, they can. Now, they're two very large employers, and there are people in places all over the country that work for these very large employers. If they're not walking the talk, it'll be very, very obvious very quickly that was a bit of a smokescreen, if indeed it was. So when that happens, you'll become an Enron. There's no question about that. There's no question. But it also brings up the idea of brand purpose. You know, what's an ethical brand to do from the point of view of how it depicts itself. And you look at that and you say, you know, it's pretty easy to pick a purpose for a brand that is gives you a high return. You know, something that doesn't cost a lot to support. You know, it doesn't cost a lot to support diversity and even, you know, to create a diverse workforce. And that's evidence that you support this very good cause. But there is one cause that has been simmering in the public mind for a long while, and that's income inequality. Now, very few brands have adopted that as their brand purpose, right? Because it's expensive to do, right? If you're an employer, it's an expensive, it's a lot more expensive to support, to correct income inequality and the Gini coefficient than it is to, say, employ a diverse workforce. That's going to be very, very obvious after the crisis, because we have seen how important, the value in the value chain has been revealed to be at the bottom rather than the top management level. And as an employer, that's going to be a very big issue that people will still be looking at, in the way that the employees are treated. I do think that that's one of the things that's going to be part of the new normal, and that is something that's been simmering for a while, and that is looking at labor conditions. So I absolutely think that during the crisis, talking about that and making sure you treat your employees right is going to pay not just pay dividends, it's the right thing to do.
Excellent. We have only 2 minutes left. So unfortunately, fortunately, this is a very positive note to end up, because I'm going to put words in your mouth, Marty, and say that one of your hopes and the positive outcomes that you see is that maybe labor relations and pay will get more equal, and we can dial back the Gini index and create less polarization. I want to finish the round here and ask the other panelists. Max, what is your biggest expectation or hope of a positive outcome when we look back in a year from now, in 5 words? Max thinks it's hopeless. Maybe Don or Marty, Don or Gerald, you want to jump in?
Brands step up where the government failed.
Okay, that's a big one. That's a whole new webcast. Don, Gerald?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, we don't have to be in the same room together to still be connected. And I don't just mean for business purposes, but all our personal interests as well. I mean, it's great to stay connected in a way that I've never seen before.
Excellent. Actually, less lonely people. Loneliness is a big issue of modern society. This might actually be an antidote. And finally, Gerald?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say almost kind of the same thing. I think a year from now, what I'm hoping that we'll see is more people connected together, more virtual happy hours and the like, to kind of stay connected and know that that can be done and very easily, more so than what people thought it probably in the past. So I think that will be kind of the way.
Excellent. We'll cheer to that. And with that, dear participants, we've run out of 1 hour already. Time moves fast. It seems even faster via Zoom. If you like this, please tell your friends, colleagues, family, rate us, and don't be shy with it. And look at all the other online offerings coming up and also having been recorded in the past. You'll find them all at conference-board.org/podcast, webcast, and so on. With that, I want to say thank you again to all my panelists. Thank you to all the participants for joining in, and stay healthy.
Be safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.